The funeral of Richard Ellis had just ended, and the cold scent of white lilies still clung to my sleeve. I walked down the stairs slowly, each wooden step feeling as though it still held his final footsteps. My chest felt heavy, as if a stone was pressing down on it. Everything was silent, until a child's voice rose, clear yet cruel enough to send a chill down my spine. "So you're really still alive? Dad might not get the whole inheritance, but it won't be long." It was Ryan, my grandson. He spoke as if I were nothing more than a faint shadow, an old misplaced object. I stopped at the bottom of the staircase, looking toward the living room, the place that used to be the heart of this home. Now, the pop of champagne echoed like celebratory fireworks. LED lights flickered against neon green and red stickers plastered onto everything. The ceramic vase, the armchair, the wooden cabinet, even the lamp Richard once repaired with his own hands. Victoria, my daughter-in-law, was directing a crew of movers. "Take that table to the truck, leave the chair, we'll haul it tomorrow. Hurry up, we still need to review the design plan." Her voice was sharp, cold, stripped of any air of mourning. Chloe, my granddaughter, was scanning the room with her phone, using a measuring app. She was talking to a friend on the other end of the call. "After the remodel, this area will make the perfect spa room." I stood there, my hand gripping the railing, my heart slowing as if someone had squeezed it tight. No one looked at me. No one stepped aside. I was like a damp shadow they didn't want to touch. Then the moment came. Ryan picked up a bright yellow sticker and slapped it onto the commemorative clock Richard used to wind every morning. He pressed his thumb firmly against the wood, turned to his sister, and laughed. "This one's mine." A soft click sounded as the sticker adhered to the clock's surface. To me, that sounds hurt more than any of their words. What you're hearing isn't just a sad story. It's a poignant reminder of the value of family, gratitude, and how easily the elderly can be overlooked in the very homes they built. If you want to follow stories as real as this one, stay with us. I took a few steps into the living room, trying to steady my breath. The white ceiling lights shone down, cold and harsh, like the lights in a hospital. Everything that once felt warm here now looked so foreign that I could barely recognize it. Victoria dragged a folding chair out from the garage and set it on the floor with a sharp metallic clang. She placed it right where the armchair I'd sat in for decades used to be, the chair Richard used to call Mother's Throne. Victoria looked at me with a small smile, but there wasn't an ounce of kindness in it. "This chair suits you better. Light, easy to fold, not in the way." I opened my mouth to say something, but the room was filled with voices and the constant peel, snap of stickers being torn off their sheets. No one noticed me watching as my armchair was hauled away, like an object that no longer held value. In the corner, Chloe kept scanning the walls. The screen showed red and blue lines running along the room. She spoke into her phone. "Once the remodel's done, this will be the spa room. Definitely easier to rent out." I looked at the granddaughter I once carried when she was just a tiny newborn. Now she saw my living room as nothing more than part of a renovation project, nothing more. Daniel, my son, stood by the window. Sunlight hit his face, revealing dark circles beneath his eyes. He looked thinner than I remembered. Daniel had always been good at hiding his feelings, but today I could sense the nervousness in every one of his movements. I didn't know then that he was drowning in debt from a failed investment, and at that very moment, this house was his only ticket out. I didn't know that yet, but I felt the urgency in his voice. "Mom, stay in the back of the house tonight, all right?" Daniel said without looking directly at me. The words sounded gentle enough, but everyone understood it was an instruction, not a suggestion. Victoria pointed toward the back door. "The laundry room is empty. We set up a camp bed for you. Just rest there for now. It's messy here." I followed them, one step at a time. The laundry room was at the end of the hallway where Richard once kept his tools. Now it held only the smell of dampness, bleach, and a dim yellow light from an aging bulb. In the middle was a folding bed, no sheets, no pillow, just a thin blanket. "Just for a few days, Mom," Daniel said, still avoiding my eyes. I sat down. The bed squeaked, the cold metal frame seeping into my back. Victoria placed a paper plate in front of me with some chicken and potatoes that had already gone cold. "We're eating over there. You eat here." "It's quieter." The door closed behind them. I stared at the plate. The chicken had dried out, the oil on top congealing into a dull film. I lifted the fork, my hand trembling. I hid my hand under a cloth so no one would see how weak it was. I took a bite. The chicken was so cold and harsh that I had to force myself to swallow so it wouldn't get stuck in my throat. From the living room, sounds still drifted in. Laughter, furniture is being dragged, stickers being slapped onto the belongings I had cared for all my life. Each sounded a reminder that in this house, I had become an inconvenience. I set the plate aside. In that moment, for the first time in years, I saw it clearly. They didn't just want the house, they wanted the land. They wanted my life out of the way so theirs would be easier. In that cramped laundry room, hands trembling under an old cloth, I understood if I didn't stand up now, I would be erased from my own life. In the laundry room with its dim yellow light, my mind returned to the years no one in this family ever bothered to remember. 15 years ago, our entire lives were balanced on a line so thin that a single gust of wind could have knocked everything down. I still remember that night clearly. Richard walked into the house and closed the door slowly, as if a loud sound would make everything collapse even faster. His tie was loosened, and his hand trembled slightly as he placed his keys on the table. I looked at him and immediately knew something was wrong. "Marion." He called my name, his voice low and hoarse. "We're in serious trouble." I pulled out a chair and sat beside him. Richard opened his briefcase and laid before me a stack of numbers glowing red. Ellis Dynamics, the work of his entire life, was on the verge of bankruptcy. Contracts were being put on hold, investors were pulling out, and the bank was tightening its limits. Everything had just a few weeks left. "I've tried everything, but it's not enough," he said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "If we don't have the deposit before the end of the month, they'll close the file. Everything will be gone." I looked at the man sitting in front of me, the man who had always seemed strong, almost unshakable. But that day, he looked different. His shoulders slumped, his eyes full of worry. For the first time in many years, I saw Richard afraid. "How much do you need?" I asked. Richard stayed silent for a moment. "A large amount. Too large to borrow quickly. We have no assets left to mortgage." I didn't say a word. I stood up, walked into the bedroom, and opened the bottom drawer of the wooden dresser. I took out a dark leather box. Inside were pieces of jewelry I had kept for years. My mother's emerald necklace, the ruby earrings Richard had given me on our wedding day, and a few items I had saved since my girlhood. Each piece was a memory, but memories don't save a family. I carried the box to the kitchen and placed it in front of him. "This should be enough," I said quietly, as if we were only discussing dinner. Richard looked at me, his eyes showing surprise mixed with gratitude, but also something like guilt. "Marion, you don't have to do this." "We all have to," I replied. I took the box to an old jeweler's shop near the market. The shop owner, Mr. Howard, looked at me for a long moment before asking, "Are you sure?" I nodded. I signed the papers and sold every piece of jewelry I owned. The money was transferred directly into Ellis Dynamics' deposit account that same day. No one in the family knew. No one asked. That evening, when Richard held the certificate of transfer in his hands, he hugged me for a long time. "I promise no one will know you did this," he said. "No one on the board would accept a woman behind the strategy that saved the company. We have to let me take the credit." I looked at him and simply said, "Do what you need to do." And I stayed silent, as I always had, I didn't need my name in public. I just wanted my family to stay standing. Richard kept his promise. The world praised him for saving the company. No one knew about me. And I never asked for anything in return. But as I sat in the makeshift laundry room of my own home, listening to the laughter outside, I realized those buried years were the foundation of everything. Without them, they would have nothing to fight over today. After the deposit money was sent, it seemed for a moment that things had calmed down. But Richard knew better. Money alone wasn't enough. The company needed a new direction. It needed a plan strong enough to convince the board that Ellis Dynamics was worth giving another chance. I remember that week, Richard barely slept. Drafts were scattered all over his desk. He wrote, then discarded. Wrote again, then crumpled the pages. Near midnight, he held his head in his hands and sighed. I can't think anymore. They want to see something completely different. I stood in the kitchen making him a cup of tea, but my heart felt as heavy as stone. I had studied finance before starting a family. I used to understand market reports and analyze growth models. Those things, set aside for years because of household duties, had never really left me. That night, after Richard had fallen asleep on the sofa, I sat at the desk. The yellow light cast shadows on the blank pages. I set the tea aside and opened the company files Richard had forgotten on the table. I read until nearly 1 a.m. The numbers, market trends, investor behaviors, all of it came to me like familiar puzzle pieces. Somehow, in the quiet, I knew exactly what the company needed to survive. I picked up a pen. The ink glided across the paper smoothly, never once stopping. A step-by-step proposal took form, restructuring the product line, adjusting expenses, expanding into fast-growing industry segments, and approaching investors again after the recovery phase. No fancy language. I wrote only what needed to be written. I signed at the bottom right corner using the pen name L. Rayner, a name I came up with in the moment, not out of mystery. Simply because, as Richard said, the board back then would never accept a proposal from a woman, especially the director's wife. When I looked at the clock, it was past 4 a.m. The house was still. Even the leaves outside didn't move. I folded the proposal, sealed it in a large envelope, and wrote a single line. To Ellis Dynamics Strategy Department? No sender's name. The next morning, while Richard was still asleep, I walked to the mailbox and dropped the envelope in. It was done. No one knew. 2 days later, Richard burst through the door, eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in years. Marion, you won't believe this. The board received an anonymous proposal. They say it's the best plan they've ever seen. They want an emergency meeting. He handed me the papers. It was exactly what I had written, every word unchanged. Richard held it with both hands, just as he had once held our newborn child. The person who wrote this, Richard chuckled softly. Even the formatting looks familiar, like your handwriting from back then. I just smiled. Is that so? Richard didn't ask more. Maybe he knew, maybe he didn't, but it didn't matter. A week later, Ellis Dynamics secured a new investment deal. The company didn't just escape bankruptcy, it launched a new IPO plan months later. The press called Richard the man who turned everything around. The stock price kept rising. The company opened 2 new branches, and I stood behind it all, silently, as always. But there was one thing I didn't let go of. I kept the handwritten draft in an old wooden box under the bedroom floor. The paper had curled slightly at the corners, but the ink was still green. It was the only proof of the truth I had quietly kept for myself. I never thought I would need it. But everything happening in this house made one thing clear. The truth cannot stay buried forever. I returned to the living room that afternoon. Weak sunlight filtered through the windows but did little to brighten the room. Instead, the neon stickers stood out even more. They clung to every corner of the walls, to each piece of furniture, to the things that had belonged to Richard and me. Each sticker's snap sounded heavy, not quick, not tentative, definitive, like a complete stop at the end of every memory in this house. Ryan stood on a chair, pressing a blue sticker onto the photo of Richard and me, taken on our 30th anniversary. Chloe set up a small ladder to add stickers to other framed pictures. Victoria stood in the middle of the room, reading from a sheet of paper. Wood frames, send to warehouse, living room table, hand to the transport company, cabinet by the door, keep. Her room, clear out tonight, move to the backyard. I heard the last two words very clearly. Backyard. Daniel walked past me. His eyes didn't stop. He murmured, as if afraid of hearing himself, "Mom is just part of the estate's leftovers." I stood still. No argument, no reaction. Some words don't hurt immediately. They seep in, and only later do you feel their weight. I felt something inside pause, and at the same time, something else rose up. Not anger, but clarity. Victoria signaled for the workers to pull a large crate down the hall. As they dragged the refrigerator out to clean beneath it, something fell and slid across the floor. It was an old photograph. The wooden frame was scratched, the glass dusty. I bent to pick it up. It was a picture of Richard with his arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling on the porch in our younger days. A photo I had assumed had been carefully put away somewhere, but it hadn't. It had been tossed behind the fridge, like an item no longer needed. I wiped the dust off with my sleeve. When I saw my face in the picture, something inside me lit up. Not nostalgia. A reminder. I once had a place here. I had been the keeper of this family's foundation. And now they were trying to push me out of my own life. I rose and went to the old bedroom. The room had been mostly cleared. The smell of old wood remained, but the drawers had been rifled through, leaving only scraps of paper. I knelt by the rug, pulled up its edge, and pressed my hand on the floorboard I knew could be lifted. Richard had helped me hide essential things there. No one knew. No one had ever asked. I slid my hand into the narrow gap and lifted the board. The old wooden box sat snug in the hollow as if it had been waiting for me for a long time. I opened the lid. The smell of old paper and blue ink was intact. Inside were three things: a bank document with a blue ink signature, the proof that I had transferred all the jewelry money to save the company, receipts from the sale of the jewelry, each item listed, dated, and finally, the handwritten IPO strategy draft I had written, signed L. Rayner in the corner. I touched each paper gently, not to reminisce, but to confirm the truth was still here. And for the first time in many years, I knew what I had to do. I closed the box, placed it in my lap, and sat for several minutes without speaking. The noises from the living room, the dragging of chairs, the stickers being stuck onto my belongings, the laughter, seemed to recede. Before, I had remained silent for the family. I had kept everything for Richard, for Daniel, for this house itself. But staying silent too long only makes others believe you do not exist. I stood, put the wooden box into my handbag, and walked out of the laundry room where they had made me stay. I went straight to the front door, opened it, and took a deep breath. The porch air was cool and light, and I felt as if I had stepped into a new chapter. I opened my old contacts list on my phone. His name was still there, Mr. Halden, lawyer. I tapped to call. When he answered, I said only 2 words: "It's time." The next morning, I left the house with the bag holding the wooden box while the air was still misty. I called a taxi to Halden & Associates' office, a tall glass building in the old business district. I had come here many years before, when Richard was alive, but never as myself. The receptionist led me into a small conference room. A few minutes later, Mr. Halden entered. He looked older than I remembered, his hair much whiter, but his gaze was still sharp and alert. "Marion?" he asked, slightly surprised. "I thought you were here about the estate?" "I'm here about the truth," I replied, then opened my bag and placed the wooden box on the table. Mr. Halden removed his glasses and looked at me for a long moment before opening the lid. When the old papers were taken out, the white light from the window fell across the yellowed pages, revealing small creases. He picked up the bank document first. "Blue ink," he murmured. "They don't use this kind of ink in financial transactions anymore." "That's the day I transferred the money to save the company," I said quietly. He nodded and set it aside. He opened the receipts from the jewelry sales. The edges of the paper were slightly frayed, the smell of old paper evoking memories of signing each one. "And this?" Mr. Halden asked when he saw the handwritten draft. I pointed to the signature line. My pen name, L. Rayner. That proposal was the foundational strategy for Ellis Dynamics' first IPO plan. Mr. Halden hugged the stack of papers to his chest and was silent for a long while. Then he said what I had braced myself to hear. "Marion, this happened 15 years ago. Reproving it won't be easy." "I know," I replied, "but I need you to try." He nodded. "I'll contact the bank to verify the transaction. As for the draft, we'll need handwriting analysis. I know an expert at UCLA." At that, I felt my spirits dip, not from fear, but from the realization that this would not be resolved in a day. No matter how clear the truth may be, it takes time for it to be recognized. That afternoon, I returned home. The family barely noticed me come in, but I saw the way they looked at each other. They knew I had been somewhere. I overheard Daniel say to Victoria, "Mom's acting strange. Check her email to see what she's doing." I stood on the stairs and heard every word. I said nothing. I had logged out of my email before leaving the house. They would only find blank pages. A few days later, Mr. Halden called. His voice sounded tired but steady. "The bank has replied, but only partially. Some old files must be retrieved from an out-of-state archive. It may take a few more days." I sat in the laundry room with the phone to my ear. My heart beat faster than usual, but I said, "I understand. I can wait." That very evening, he sent another email. The handwriting expert had reviewed the original draft but could not yet reach a conclusion. "They need samples of your handwriting over many years," he wrote. I had to find the old notes, the scribbles I had left in Richard's drawers. I brought them all to the office. 14 samples in total, from shopping lists to notes left for Richard before his business trips. The UCLA expert spent 3 days analyzing them. They used UV light to examine the blue ink on the receipts, checking ink spread and stroke structure. Each time I received an update email, my heart tightened a little. 6 days later, the call came in late afternoon. "Marion," Mr. Halden said, "we have preliminary results. All handwriting samples match. The level of similarity is very high." I sat down on the folding bed. The laundry room was so quiet I could hear the wind slipping through the door crack. "And the bank records?" I asked softly. "They're sending the originals," he replied. "But the preliminary confirmation email is enough for me to begin preparing legal documents." I closed my eyes. In that moment, I knew, for the first time in many years, the truth was stepping into the light. And this time, I would not let anyone bury it again. The day of the will reading came sooner than I expected. I arrived at Halden & Associates a few minutes early. I sat in the hallway watching people pass by, feeling an unusual calm. Perhaps I had been waiting for this moment longer than I had admitted to myself. The conference room where the will would be read was large and bright, with transparent glass walls and a long, polished steel table. The white LED lights made the space feel cold, as if everything here was precise and impartial. I chose a chair at the far end of the table and sat quietly. The door opened. Daniel entered in a gray suit, his tie neatly in place. Victoria followed, wearing heavy lipstick and a faint trail of perfume. The 2 children looked around the room as if they were expecting a gift-giving, rather than a reading of their grandfather's will. "Is it time already?" Daniel chirped, as if this were a familiar meeting. They sat together near the front, murmuring about who would take what. I heard Victoria whisper, The European trip should definitely be reserved starting today. Daniel laughed, confident. Dad's estate will take care of us for life. I looked at them without blame, but I felt an unbridgeable distance. The door closed as Mr. Chloe Halden entered. He carried a black leather briefcase and a thick stack of documents. He scanned the room and then spoke in a low, clear voice. Thank you all for coming. Today we will read the last will of Mr. Richard Ellis. No one noticed that his gaze lingered on me a little longer than usual. Explosion 1. Mr. Halden opened his briefcase and took out a small recorder. I will play an audio clip from the security system in the Ellis home, recorded 3 days after the funeral. My family looked up immediately. Before they could react, the recording played in the room. Ryan's voice. So you're really still alive? How annoying. Chloe's voice. Like I said, just wait a bit longer. Then we'll remodel the whole place. Victoria's voice. As long as she doesn't cause trouble, the estate must end up in the right hands. Then Daniel's voice. Clear and cruelest of all, Mom is just part of the estate's leftovers. No one spoke. Daniel's face went pale. Victoria looked at her husband, her expression gone. Mr. Halden set a spreadsheet on the table. In the will, Mr. Richard Ellis stipulated, for every insulting remark about his mother, $1 million will be deducted from the inheriting share. He turned the page. Total number of offending remarks, 88. Daniel opened his mouth, but he couldn't speak. Explosion 2. Mr. Halden produced another file, the file I had submitted. Next, he said slowly, is the declaration of intellectual property ownership related to Ellis Dynamics' IPO strategy. Daniel tensed. The IPO was my father's... No, Mr. Halden said. According to the UCLA analysis, the handwriting in the IPO manuscript matches Marion Ellis's handwriting exactly. Furthermore, the copyright was never transferred. Therefore, the lawful owner is Marion Ellis. Victoria covered her mouth. Chloe dropped her phone on the table. Ryan's eyes went wide. Mr. Halden continued, the annual returns from this intellectual property amount to several $1 million. All of it belongs to Mrs. Marion. Explosion 3. Finally, Mr. Halden took out a sealed envelope. This is a handwritten letter Mr. Richard left behind. He opened it and read, if they do not see the person your mother is, then let the truth speak for me. Marion is the one who saved this family. If the children are not respectful enough to see what she has done, then let this will teach them. Silence stretched across the room. Daniel turned to me. His gaze was ready to collapse, as if he had no foothold left. I stood for the first time during the meeting. My voice was not loud, but it was clear enough for everyone to hear. You forget who gave you this house, but the truth does not forget. No one answered, not because they did not want to, but because there were no words left. After the will reading, Halden and Associates fell into an odd quiet. No more confident chatter, no more smiles ready for the moment of claiming assets. My family walked out into the hallway with faces I had never seen before, ashen, bewildered, and a little like frightened people. Mr. Halden walked beside me and handed me a small envelope. The handover order will be executed immediately. They have 48 hours to vacate your house. I nodded. I felt no joy, no gloating. My emotions had long since been muted. In that moment, only clarity remained. When I returned home, the scene inside was nothing like it had been before. No loud laughter, no talk of remodeling, no stickers stuck casually on belongings. Instead, there was the sound of rolling suitcases, hastily packed cardboard boxes, and furniture being shoved aside. The whole house sounded like a frantic, discordant tune. Chloe passed me with swollen eyes. She wouldn't look me in the face and clutched a small box. Ryan was stuffing clothes into a duffel bag, tense and impatient. Victoria spoke nonstop into her phone, her voice more flustered than I had ever heard. And Daniel... He stood in the living room, where he used to build block towers with me when he was 5 years old. Now he seemed decades older in the span of a single morning. When I walked by, he looked at me. The look had lost arrogance and calculation. All that remained was a sun struck by the truth right in the chest. "Mom," his voice was hoarse, "could you give us a little more time? Everything happened so fast." I looked at my son. The lines on his face reminded me of so many years, nights awake caring for him when he had a fever, the times I held him through his school failures, the meals I cooked to keep the family together. I remembered it all. But I was also the one who had heard him say, "Mom is just part of the estate's leftovers." Daniel stepped closer. Suddenly, he fell to his knees. His hands rested on my knees, like the child who once clung to my hand, terrified of storms. "I beg you, just a few days, don't do this to us." I placed my hand on his shoulder, not trembling, not hesitant. My voice was warm enough for him to hear, but firm enough for him to understand the truth of it. "I gave my whole life to this family. This is the first time I am keeping something that belongs to me." Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. He knew there were no more words to say. Behind him, Victoria shouted, almost hysterically, "Marion, you're tearing this family apart." I turned to her. My gaze was not angry, just clear. "I am not tearing anything apart. You started this the day you decided older people had no value, the day you treated a mother-in-law like an obstacle, the day you saw the person who raised you as disposable." Victoria fell silent. Those words were not loud, but they stopped her in her tracks. Over the next 48 hours, the family hurriedly packed. No more stickers, no more laughter, no more whispered plans, as if the future were already theirs. I passed through each room without letting duty or bitterness pull me back. I wanted to look at the house one last time as its owner, a role they had tried to strip from me. In the kitchen, I found a small wooden chair. It was the chair Richard had made by hand during the first year we moved in. I placed my hand on its seat and felt as if I were touching a piece of the past I wanted to keep. When the clock struck late afternoon on the second day, I heard a car door slam. My family stood in the yard, each carrying a bag or a box. No one came near me. Daniel looked at me one last time, his eyes red. I'm sorry, Mom." I nodded gently. "I hope this time you remember for long." The gate closed behind them, so softly I almost didn't hear it. In that moment, I understood one thing. This break was not about money, not about the house. It began the day they forgot to respect the elderly, and when they forgot the debt of gratitude owed for being born. "Duoi jai laban dich tieng an, mai jai ju chin sak, hong them bot." After my family left, the large house became so quiet I could hear the wind tapping gently against the window. I stood in the living room for a long while, looking at the empty spaces newly freed from those neon stickers. The belongings, once treated like trophies, had returned to their rightful places. I no longer felt the need to keep the house. It held too many chaotic echoes from the past days, and I knew I needed a different beginning. Not to forget, but to live more lightly. A few months later, I signed the papers to sell it. A young couple bought the house. They said they loved the light, loved the front yard, and hoped to have children soon. I smiled. I didn't say much. The house would have new laughter. I moved into a small apartment near the Santa Monica shoreline. The place wasn't prominent, but just enough for me to feel comfortable. A big window opened toward the ocean, and the breeze coming in was cool and fresh. Every morning I made a cup of tea, sat in the chair by the window, and watched the waves come in and roll back out. Steady, calm, no conflict, no voices fighting over things, only waves, birds, and the rhythm of my own breathing. I chose to live simply, only a few items in the apartment, a small table, a sofa, and a few potted plants I tended myself. But on the refrigerator door, I kept exactly one thing, a drawing my youngest grandchild gave me years ago. A colored pencil sketch, me with big glasses standing next to a yellow light bulb. At the bottom, the messy handwriting, "Grandma is the smartest." When I stuck that drawing to the fridge, I stood still for a moment, not to dwell on the past, just a reminder that once, someone saw me clearly. A time before ambition or adult indifference blurred everything. With the royalties and the money I had never used before, I created a small foundation. I named it Legacy Keepers Foundation. The idea was simple: to support older women who were overlooked in their own families, women who had given their whole lives quietly, but whose names were never mentioned. I didn't need to build something grand, just enough for them to feel they still had a voice and value. Every time someone sent a thank you letter, I read it slowly. Some letters were only a few lines, yet they held entire lives. Mothers, wives, grandmothers who had once been dismissed as little things. I understood them. They understood me. And that was enough. In the evenings, I often opened my window to let the sea breeze drift inside. I turned off all the lights, letting only the glow from outside fall softly onto the walls. The sound of the waves hitting the shore sounded like a long, patient sigh. Unhurried, undemanding. I didn't need to speak any moral lesson. Life spoke it for me. Respecting the elderly is the foundation that keeps a home standing. When that is forgotten, a family cracks from the inside. But if even one person is willing to stand up and hold on to a piece of truth, then there is still hope for things to be put back in their rightful place. I sat in the chair by the window, looking at the sea, listening to the wind, and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Not because I won or because someone else lost, but because at last I was entirely myself, clearly and thoroughly. Stories of gratitude and truth from the elderly are far more abundant than we imagine. If you wish to continue hearing them, understanding them, and preserving what is worth cherishing, stay with us.